Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell, laughing in the face of motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy. Today, we're talking to Renee Reina. She is the creator and host of The Mom Room, a top parenting podcast. It also has a wildly popular Instagram following, including me. With a PhD in psychology, Renee is not afraid to get real about the ups and downs of motherhood, offering expert insights and honest conversations for every mom out there. Welcome, Renee.
Thank you for having me. I love hearing intros about myself. I don't know what that says about me as a person, but I'm like, oh.
We were
You're
just
like,
talking
"That's
on our
me,
bonus
that's me."
episode. We were just talking on our bonus episode about how weird it is when people are singing happy birthday to you and you don't know what to do with your face. That's
I
what
know,
I
I'm
feel
like-
like when people are like, she's talking about me right now.
Nice to see you guys this morning.
Renee, tell us how and when you decided to start the Mom Room.
Oh my gosh, my story is so funny. Every time people are like, oh, what do you do for a living? I'm like, I make TikToks and I have a podcast. But I feel like I need to explain how I got there all the time. And so I have a PhD in psychology, like you said, and my intention was to be a professor or work in a research institute downtown Toronto. We live on the outskirts of Toronto. And then I defended my dissertation 3 days before the world shut down. So I was in Ottawa, defended my dissertation, came home, and then it was like, doors are closed.
You're not going anywhere.
You're not going anywhere.
You do.
And at the time, our son was 18 months old, around that age. My husband's a physician, so he was working his regular job outside of the house. So I was just at home with Milo, our son, day in and day out on my own. And so I started making TikToks. I was like, what is this app all about? If I look back on my first TikToks, you could tell I'm just trying to learn how to use the app. It's just like funny dancing videos and stuff. And then I started the podcast shortly after I started to gain a TikTok following. And then it became my job.
And how old is your son now?
6.5.
Yeah, so you're like, we always say at this point in the podcast, we come from the future. You are in it. You are in it. We are in the future, but you are deeply in it. What is 6 looking like at your house? What are the challenges? What are you dealing with? What's going great and what's going absolutely horrendously?
I love 6. I always tell people when they have younger kids, once they're 4.5, 5, your world completely changes.
Agree.
They become more independent, but they still want you to rub their back before bed, which is cute.
Yeah.
You kind of have the best of both worlds. I love that he is developing into this funny little human and you get to watch more of his personality. You can reason with them. You can take them on more experiences and they're actually understanding what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like watching a movie together. He has the attention span now to sit and watch a movie. We take him to the movies all the time. Challenges, I would say, are still, like the big emotions, the big feelings, and how to navigate. It doesn't happen as often as when he was younger, but when it does happen, it almost seems to be more not explosive, but it's just because he's bigger and it just seems like more of a, oh my God, what's happening? And trying to navigate those moments, I would say, are the most difficult
And I
right
think
now.
it's the flip side a little bit of the reasoning piece that you're like, oh, I can reason with this person, except for these times that we call red brain, where
Yes.
you're kind of get lulled into a sense of complacency when you have a couple of reasonable, well, maybe if you don't want to break it, so let's put it down carefully. And that works once. And you're like, oh, we're in the age of reason now. And the next thing you know, there's a lot of crying over the mac and cheese being in the wrong shape. And you're like, wait, what happened to the age of reason? I thought we were reasonable now.
I know. And things just seem like a bigger deal, you don't want. And I remember people always telling me, you still have difficulties as they get older. It just changes. What becomes difficult is different. And then also as they get older, the things that you worry about are more serious. you know?
Yeah.
Kind of. We come from like the future to tell people that it gets better. I think there's a lot of content out there telling that just you wait,
Yeah.
right? Big kids, big problems. I don't know why people do that. I mean, maybe your adolescent will have big problems, and maybe you'll have, like I have a high schooler right now that it is a peaceful kingdom in my house right now. It just depends. And we try very hard because our kids are a lot older than 6 now to just say like, it might just be really good. And it
Yeah.
doesn't get like the magic doesn't stop.
I
It
feel
just changes.
so me from the past. I
From the past.
We've established that.
Yes.
Yeah. It's
the olden
now.
days.
It's the now, to be clear.
I think about myself when I was in high school and going to parties or even in university, let's say, and I see I remember what other kids were doing and just like things that can happen. And I'm like, oh my God, I think I worry like, what if he gets in with the wrong crowd and he like makes bad choices and something terrible happens? And I know that's like catastrophizing before, like he's 6.5, but I think about those things and you just hope that he will have the confidence that I had as a teenager to not do those things and to hang around with people that, make you feel good and don't like bully you. And yeah, I don't know. It's just like wild to think about.
And I just actually interviewed my best friend on the podcast because she has a new book coming out. And it was so interesting to have a conversation. We met when we were 13.
Oh,
And we were best friends all through we've been best friends ever since, basically. But she wrote this beautiful book about a kind of a girl's reckoning with her own mother and talking to each other as moms and remembering how our mothers were when we were in high school and being wild, and that both of us kind of felt like the other person's mom understood us better. But as moms, now we look back and say, oh, right, because our own mom's job at the time wasn't to understand us. It was to discipline us and stop us from making really stupid mistakes. And so it is really interesting, that journey that you're on from like being the kid to being the adult of a teenage.
yeah.
Wait a minute. I know too much. I know too much.
Yes.
I wanted to talk a little bit about, so I did a reel with you. Oh, sorry. I was on your podcast and you had a reel that was a clip from it
Mhm.
that went, for me, totally viral. I don't know about you, but I mean, it blew up, and it's on our page. We'll link to it in the show notes. And anyway, you and I are talking in this clip about how working moms in the 2020s today spend more time with their kids than stay-at-home moms did in the 70s and 80s. And by that, we mean like actual time with
Yeah.
them, actual time doing homework and building, magnet tiles, more time. And people were like, no, half the people in the comments were like, absolutely, that's true. My mom was just sort of around, right? And I was living my life and she was sort of home. That was what our moms were sort of instructed to do. Whereas parents today, I think, are instructed to be there every moment, to make every moment magic, right? Elf on the shelf every morning.
Yeah.
And I was surprised that there was so much resistance to that idea because in my experience, I think that's true. I mean, what do you think?
I for sure. Like when I think about my childhood, it's like my mom and my dad are having tea in the living room and me and my sister are playing.
Right. That's how we've talked a lot about it on the podcast. My parents had a gate and it was called adult talk time, and you were not allowed to go near them. And there was a literal gate at the baby
Yes.
gate, and we would hang on it sometimes, like something must be fastened. But they were literally having martinis in the den, and there was a baby gate up. And I mean, we were definitely under 10, possibly under 7, 4 of us. And it was just like there was no expectation that dad would come home, take his coat off, and like get on the floor and make magnet tiles.
Mhm.
And even mom, she would cook and stuff, but there wasn't a lot of. She certainly wasn't out back throwing us the football.
Mhm. No, for sure. Like the whole way we run our families and like we were outside playing with all the kids in the neighborhood
Right.
until it was
Right.
time to go to bed. My mom was not in charge of the activities. Like, oh, and now we live next door to two little girls that are friends with Milo. And if sometimes they'll play outside on their own and we're kind of like on, the back patio watching them. But for the most part, it's like we're facilitating their fun.
Yes.
Like we're pushing them on the swing. We're at the playground pretending to get hamburgers when they're making food out of sand, like
Right.
we're
You're buying the mud
facilitating it.
pies. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's just more. There's like there's the elf on the shelf, and then like the leprechaun has to do something, and then also like now Valentine's Day. I was just learning that you have to do like pails that have presents in it. I mean, it used to just be paper Snoopy Valentines. You had 3 kinds at the drugstore, and you wrote them out yourself. And now it's just like getting out the cellophane to render this beautiful gift basket for every teacher. The expectations just go higher and higher.
It's like we're busier than ever with career. Like we're told that we need to have this career and be independent and focus on education and all that stuff. And then we have kids and now we're getting it from both sides. Like you need to do everything with your child. You have to do the teacher gifts. And if you don't, you feel like there's been a few times where Milo comes home with all these presents from school on Halloween. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even
miss the memo.
Think to do it. And then I'm like, are the other parents thinking like, oh, there's no gift here from Milo? It's wild. It's wild.
And I think it is all of a piece of the same thing that you were saying about, I'm worried about high school. I'm worried about that, kids are going to go out and do the crazy things that I did. It's all of this comes down fundamentally. I mean, there's social media and there's like, you should keep up and all that. But I think a lot of it is anxiety too, that like we have to be at the playground, that, if I was 5 and walking down the street to the library and playing with friends, a lot of stuff did go down that wasn't great, and there was danger associated that because the moms weren't around. Similarly, now I think you would be hard pressed to find a total high school rager with alcohol happening in someone's basement because most people don't do that anymore in the same way that it was done back in the day, I think that this idea that we can keep kids safe by controlling all the outcomes, by sitting 1 foot away at the playground and by, supervising the parties. I understand where the instinct comes from. It just has ups and downs on both sides of it, I think.
It's a double-edged sword. It's we want to protect our kids from every single negative thing that could happen, from like the smallest thing, like somebody looks at them funny and we're like, oh my God, don't worry, they didn't mean it. Like, to the big things. But at the end of the day, I think about things that I went through and, if people made fun of me and those are all learning things throughout your life that make you the adult that you are. So I always go back and forth thinking, having a few like bumps on the chin and going through, a fight with a friend or whatever it might be is not necessarily a bad thing. Like they need to learn how to navigate these situations as well, because when you are living on your own and you get a job and your boss is mean to you, what are you going to do? Like these things will happen for the rest of your life.
Right. That's right. We say that you have to send your kid to college having failed already, so it won't happen for the first time once they're there.
Yeah.
We're talking to Renee Reina from The Mom Room, and we will be right back. So Renee, you are extremely honest and open with your own parenting journey and your own personal journey on the show. And you've been recently talking about ADHD and being diagnosed and taking medication. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about that and also a little bit about how you perceive it as being part of your parenting.
I feel, the ADHD thing is very interesting. And I will say I have medication for it, but for some reason I was very nervous to try the medication because I think I had this thought in my mind, like if I took it, I'm not going to sleep. Because a lot of people who have tried it said that they had really like a difficult time sleeping. And to me, that's my worst nightmare, like not sleeping. So it took me a long time to actually try it. And for me, I find I can take it on days where I have, a bunch of recordings lined up and a bunch of things to get done around the house, but I don't necessarily take it every day like a lot of people do. Um, the thing that interests me about ADHD and specifically women having ADHD, I feel like once you have kids and you're working and you're trying to do all the things like the Valentine's buckets and all this stuff, like it's almost like our environment fuels the symptoms of ADHD, if that makes sense. We have so many things going on at every given moment. And I always laugh because I am very productive when it comes to work things. And people are like, oh my God, how do you do all this stuff? It's crazy. But then if you looked at my closet or my cupboards or my drawers, you would be like, oh my God, this girl is a mess. So I don't feel like I grew up struggling with ADHD, because when you read about it, like I didn't have that. But once I had a child, I was doing a job where it's very like small tasks as opposed to like sitting down and writing a paper for 2 weeks, a very focused, like long task.
Right.
My job right now is like all over the place. It's like an email here, shoot a TikTok here, record a podcast here, bouncing, and I'm at home. So then on top of that, it's like I'm worrying about getting stuff done around the house. And sometimes it's like you have so many things to do that you just kind of freeze and don't get anything done. Or it's like I empty out my closet thinking, okay, I'm going to organize my closet today. And then, oh, I'm going to go do something else. And now my closet's emptied. Everything's all over the place. So once I started to clue in, and it's probably from seeing other people's content on ADHD. And I remember specifically doing an episode with a psychiatrist who specializes in ADHD in women. And my husband's a physician. And I was just starting to clue in, like, I think I have this problem. And now I look at my mom and my mom's mom, and I'm like, yeah, we're all struggling with this.
Yeah.
Yes, because now my mamere, I guess back then when she was my age, like it's not really something that people were talking about, especially in women. So now she hears me talking about these things and she's like, oh my God, like I have struggled with all these things my entire life. So I'm happy the conversations are happening and people are starting to take inventory of like, maybe this isn't normal, So the medication is great on days when I need it, but I feel fortunate in that I don't have to take it every day. And some people do, and it works for them. But for me, if I'm just having a regular like work at home day, nothing crazy, I don't take it.
And what has the feedback been like for you after talking about ADHD and being diagnosed as a mom? Are you finding that people are reflecting back like this happened to me as well, or this is something I want to start looking at? It's interesting to me. I think we see a lot and having kids with a diagnosis that they always say there are times when kids tend to get diagnosed. First day of preschool, starting middle school, that like there are times when the circumstances change and bring into focus some underlying issue that hasn't been addressed. And it's interesting to me that for women, motherhood can be that same transition point. And so are you hearing that from people reflecting that back to you?
Yeah, lots of people. I think a lot of the things that I talk about, so many people, oh my God, that's so relatable. This is me. And maybe have never thought before that it was an ADHD kind of thing. So I think a lot of people are starting to think about that. And like I said, so many of us are like robots, like just going through the day. And you don't actually sit back and think, okay, like, why am I doing things this way? Or I'm really struggling with finishing tasks or doing a task that is longer than 30 minutes, or it's hard to explain. It's just like the way that I function.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are actually slowing down and taking inventory of, how their day goes and things that they might be struggling with and trying to connect the dots. But I do know, like, I'm in Canada. A lot of people are like, how did you even get, a doctor to talk to you about this? Or I think a lot of people are curious where to go. I did it with my family doctor. We had a conversation for like an hour. And she basically said, if like, some people will try the medication and absolutely hate it. Like, it doesn't make them feel good.
Right.
So she's like, you will very quickly understand, like, if it's something that is going to work well or not. And I'm on like a super low dose. And I think that's because I don't take it every day. My body doesn't adjust to it.
Right.
So hopefully I'll keep it that way. But yeah, I think your doctor would be your first starting point, and then maybe they can direct you.
You have such an interesting perspective, Renee, because okay, you're a mom with ADHD. You're just like everybody listening or watching your content. You also have a PhD in psychology, and so do you sort of come at it from both ways? Like, I'm an expert in something like this, and I'm also a fellow traveler. How do you sort of offer both to your audience?
It's funny because doing my PhD, that's why, like, I probably had certain characteristics that were like, oh, that's peculiar. Like, I remember one of my professors saying the way I did my work, like statistics and stuff, he was like, that's really odd. Like, he didn't want to say it, but he was like, interesting. And I was like, really? Like, I thought this was like, it was very strange. Like a coding system. And I think it served me in those situations, like in academia. But then, like I said, my lifestyle and my day-to-day completely flipped when I started podcasting, doing social media. I was a mom. I had a little kid. My husband obviously has a super busy schedule. It was completely different. And then so the way I did things as a grad student, like, I couldn't do that in my new environment. So it was just kind of all over the place. Did that answer your question?
Well, I'm curious about, like, do you I guess I'm curious, did being a doctorate of psychology make you feel like, I can't have ADHD? I'm the doctorate in psychology who sees everything in other people. I don't have
No,
this
I
difference
feel
myself.
like once I figured that out about myself, I was like, oh, that's probably why I do so well in school.
Yeah.
Like, I love an exam. Like, studying, doing an exam. Like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I feel like it served me for so long, living by myself in a condo. Everything was spick and span, immaculate, in place. And then you have a house with 2 Pomeranians, a young child, and a husband. And I'm like,
It's not working quite the same.
yeah. So I've also had to, like, let things go. Like, your house is not going to be perfect. So you need to let that go. And I have.
I wonder also, listening to you talk about ADHD and thinking about it and seeing it in my kids and other people's kids, how much, and we talk a lot about on the podcast, the value of women's work at home, or people's work at home, really, like the kind of default parents' work at home. And I mean, I've certainly participated in these like memes and comedy things of like the hot mess mom. Oh, mom's a mess. And the picture, I think that we kind of moved from like the Betty Draper, Doris Day, like mom and 4 petticoats, perfect kitchen, to like now the picture of the mom is like the laundry basket's overflowing and the baby's covered in spit up and the mom's hair has carrots in it. And that these kind of images of moms might work against us seeing something being a fixable problem in the home, like an inability to kind of keep all of these things going. It's become almost so normalized that I think, like, when would I know, like, oh, I might actually need help with this. There might be something that was fixable in this kind of hot mess mom version of ourselves.
It's funny, those like, I see the humor in all of that content, like, I've done it too, especially in quarantine, good lord.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like you said, it normalizes, like, "Oh, this is how it should be,"
Right.
you know? And similar to that, in quarantine, I remember a few times I made a video, and this was very common in quarantine, about, like, moms drinking wine.
Right. We've talked to people about this very issue that, like, mom wine time
Yeah.
became really problematic for a lot of moms.
Yeah.
And this is such an interesting point you're bringing up, because this is it. Like, is mom ADHD metaphorically close to, like, mom wine time, as we should maybe stop normalizing this as part of the way you have to cope?
Right. Right. I the wine thing, like, that really, like, struck me. Somebody wrote me this really lovely DM. She had struggled with alcoholism, and I was like, "Oh my god." Like, I and so many of us who are making light of, like, "Oh, like, this is how I cope. I have a glass of wine." Other people, like, when you're constantly seeing that message, you're like, it's starting to normalize
Right.
that. And so the same with, like, like, everything is chaos. It's funny, but at the same time, I don't like that it's normalizing, like, "Oh, this is what motherhood is." The same as with, like you were saying back in the day, like, everything's perfect and you're in a red lipstick, like, making dinner, and I don't know. Like, I don't know.
I think that there's like a middle ground there,
Mhm.
because I think it's so important. Social media is amazing to help somebody feel seen. Oh, like, yes, I'm struggling with that too. Yes, I'm barely getting through the day in quarantine. We also did video content
Yeah.
that blew up because people were like, yes, that's exactly what it's like. We are barely holding on. Or joking about, like, my husband doesn't even know, like, how to turn the dryer on. Like, that content does really well too. But when that's the end point, like, aren't husbands ridiculous with how unable to help they are, how
Mhm.
completely, how dumb they are? Isn't it funny that I need a glass of wine at the end of the day, right? This content makes us feel seen. But if that's the if that's the end point and you don't use it to sort of then further the conversation or question those things or challenge those things, it normalizes it. Like, that's right, husbands don't help. If you consume enough content about how dumb they are, then you'll stop demanding equity.
Yeah.
Or you enough
And
content about wine, then you're like, I guess that's what everybody does.
yeah, and the thing about ADHD is, like I was saying, a lot of people will experience those things, but it's not necessarily that they have ADHD. It's more like a product of their environment,
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
it
And
does.
so it's really a matter of figuring that out, which is why, speaking to doctors, like, you can't just be like, "Oh, yeah, I relate to this. Like, I must have that too." Because in motherhood, especially with young kids, if you are the default parent, your partner works outside the home, everybody is going to experience these things to
Mhm.
some degree.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We're talking to Renee Reina from the Mom Room, and we'll be right back. So we're talking about social media, and does it sort of like highlight, like, boy, these are really broken things about mom life, ha ha ha, the end. And we all three of us create content, share content, in this system that we think maybe overall isn't so good for us sometimes. So how do you think that social media can both help people in our audiences and also maybe in some other ways not help them?
Oh boy. I guess it depends on the person. I honestly think every human should go through media, like what's it called? Media literacy.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Especially kids. It should just be something that is put in school, because we talk a lot, especially nowadays, about how social media affects children and teens, but those same things apply to adults. And I don't know why we don't talk more about that. So as someone that creates a ton of content, I do not consume much content, and people find that surprising, I guess. Same with people are like, oh, what mom podcasts do you listen to? I'm like, I listen to pop culture podcasts. It's interesting, but I find in quarantine, TikTok was really fun. I feel like it's changed. I'm very self-aware. So when I'm like scrolling Instagram, I'm like, I don't feel good. Like when I'm watching people's stories, them living their life, and everything is like, looks so exciting, I'm like, I don't feel very good.
Yeah.
Like,
I completely agree. I get that. I don't even know what it
icky.
is. It's not jealousy. It's just like a weird, I'm dying inside feeling, and I don't
Yeah.
know why.
But-
you can't quantify. It's not quite 1-to-1.
And also because it's my job, I feel immediately like I should be doing something. Like, oh, I should be putting out a piece of content like this. Like, oh, I should be storying more. I should be doing XYZ. And so, yeah, I don't know. And I feel like a lot of people, it's a huge part of their day is to scroll social media. So depending on the kinds of content that you gravitate towards, like that the algorithm has figured out that you interact with,
Right.
I think that has a big, like that plays a part in how social media is gonna make you feel.
And I think it's really important talking about media literacy to be vocalizing this stuff for our kids. I find now that I have tweens and teens that everything, so many of our conversations, and they do get annoyed at me because I am kind of a broken record. Where are you getting that information from? What is the source of that information? Why do you think someone's telling you that? Do you understand how particularly disaffected teen boys are being targeted on the internet by algorithms? And I mean, they are tired of hearing it, but I think sometimes we just think like, well, social media is in the groundwater. There's nothing you can do about it. I mean, I say all the time with the podcast, I said no TikTok. Their friends all have it. They're seeing all the TikToks. It has nothing to do with my personal choices. This is so much bigger than me. But I think in terms of talking to your kids about it, and then also talking to fellow moms about it, that sometimes I find myself saying to moms, like, where are you getting that idea? Where are you seeing that? Because and just hearing this ADHD conversation, and like I had a light bulb moment just having this conversation. Oh, that's hot mess mom stuff that's going on. And I don't know. I mean, I think that having those conversations with children and adults has to be part of that media literacy, because at least for us, they're definitely not getting it in schools.
Yeah. It's hard because I find so much incredibly valuable information
Yes.
on social media.
Right.
Like unbelievably
Like
valuable.
you just said, the ADHD, it came to you. You found something that's very important for you going forward through seeing it reflected back on social media, for sure.
Yeah. Like so valuable. But at the same time, and I used to talk a lot about information overload.
Right.
It's like at some point, it's too much. And so unless you're looking at very niche information for yourself, like digestion issues or whatever it might be, then you're just bombarded with information. And especially for new moms, holy Lord, it's overwhelming. And because we care so much about being a mom and this baby that we have, they take every piece of information very seriously. It's not just like something that you pass by. And so add it to the bucket of the mental load of all the things that we're trying to do. Now we have all this information coming at us from, the TV, books that we're supposed to read, all the parenting experts. And it's like, oh my God, at what point do we just do what feels good for us as a parent? Like, talk about anxiety. Like, that is a huge part of it. I remember when Milo was a baby, the big thing was like, there's arsenic in rice. And I was like, oh my God, like all his baby
It's
food
news
and
to
stuff
me.
is made out of rice. And so I actually went, because I still had access to all the academic articles, because I was in my PhD. I went and found the articles that were talking about arsenic and rice. And like, your child would have to eat so much rice. Like, it didn't even make sense for the amount of arsenic to even make a difference. And I was like, why are they doing
why
these
people-
clickbait headlines to try and scare people? Oh, it was so anyways, like that goes back to media literacy, you know, like these clickbait headlines to scare parents into doing things drives me nuts.
Yeah, and it has a lot to do with like locus of control, right? That like if we're presented as, you know, the Earth's problem is you washing out this strawberry container or not to recycle it, when in fact we're part of a giant system that has a lot of, you know, consequences for our planet. And similarly, and we've talked to people about this, that, you know, the idea that like what happens to your kids on screens is in any way in your control. It is a huge machine that you are a speck of. And so I think that, yeah, keeping that information and understanding, like, do I have agency in arsenic in the rice? Probably not, you know? I mean, we're all now drinking glasses of water filled with plastic particles. Sorry, we told you guys, you know? But I think that there can be, I think for me, the distinction is making those points, like what is useful, what do you take and what do you throw away from the vast amount of information that you're getting, because that's really the only thing you have control over. You don't have control over arsenic in the rice, but you might have control over figuring out whether, you know, as a mom whose kids had some very specific needs, finding those communities and what are you guys doing for this and how is this working, and, you know, connecting, using social media, I guess, to connect personally with another person with specific information. Good. Using social media to have like the fire hose of information pointed directly at your face. Bad.
You can sift out the useful from the hand wringing on social media, but it takes a lot of work, right? It takes a lot of work to be like, this isn't me watching the, you know, 42nd day of the horrors in California without giving me a sense of agency or action or something I can do isn't useful. On the other hand, I can donate money or time or clothing or whatever without consuming that content and still be a good person, right? Sometimes I think we have to, like, we feel like we have to consume the fire hose or else we're not doing our job or something. And so I guess it's like, yeah, you can be smarter for yourself. Like, I'm not going to worry about arsenic in the rice, but this is really a good idea about nap time. And I wouldn't get it if I wasn't on social media, right? But how do you sort of put those glasses on while you're scrolling? It's not so easy.
Yeah. It's a lot of work being on social media.
We say it.
But not our social media. Our social media is really positive and useful. I mean, we think about that, right? We try not to ever present, here's a big problem, nothing you can do about it. It's probably all your fault though. Like we're so uninterested in that, and it's everywhere for moms, I feel like.
Yeah, true. Not for dads though. If dads, that's one thing I've noticed, especially when it comes to a celebrity. Like you see a dad giving their child a bottle and it's like all over the news. Like, oh my God, he is amazing. Like, and then if it was a woman doing the same thing, they would be like, why so-and-so chose not to breastfeed?
Exactly. A bottle?
What
What kind of monster? Exactly.
Yes.
It's a good point. And there's starting to be content about that too on social media. I mean, I've seen a lot of that. People making content about like, here's me being a guy doing the things guys do. And it's like putting like a glass in the dishwasher and then like, you know, a band comes through the kitchen to, you know, to parade for them. But again, if that's the point, if it's like, isn't this so unfair that women, and then like we make and consume funny memes about it at the end, it's not,
Yeah.
it should be the first step.
I think I'm gonna flip that on its head, and I'm going to start. I put out one video the other day and it went viral on Instagram, and it was just me and my husband in a sports store. And I was filming him and I was like, babe, what's Milo's shoe size? Because I wanted to get him running shoes. And because my husband's the one that always knows the shoe size. And he gave me an answer. And then the text on the screen was just like, POV, you're not the default parent. Because
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that went viral. So I should start using my husband in social media content to kind of like show the other side.
Right.
He is like, I hope he doesn't hear this. He's like amazing. Like when it comes to
Don't be too nice.
yeah, when it comes to like being involved and like the mental load, like he takes on just as much as I do. It's wild. And so I need to start doing that to show the other side of
That
it.
it's right. It's useful, right? That like you don't accept that that's not possible for him to know what
Exactly.
the shoe size is. It is.
And so many people think like, oh, but he works outside the home and, you know, he's focused on his job. My husband's a surgeon and he can find the time to sign Milo up for his summer camps.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not an excuse. I'm
Right.
sorry.
No, because
Drives me
believe
nuts.
me, there's a lot of lady surgeons out there figuring out where their kids
There
go to summer
you
camp.
Go. Lady surgeon.
Lady surgeons are out there doing it.
Starring Juliana Margulies, new series,
Surgeon.
Lady Surgeon.
Yeah. And it was the same thing when we were dating. People were like, oh, like so-and-so hasn't texted me all day. You know, I'm like, really? Because my husband or my boyfriend at the time is like a urology resident and he texts me all day.
Settle for more out there, people. That's the lesson. Settle for more.
That's
Yeah.
right. Renee, tell our listeners everywhere they can find you and the mom room and everything.
So I have 2 Instagram accounts because I'm unwell. At the Renee Reina is my personal account. And then the mom room is the podcast account where I share all kinds of content from other moms and my own content and then podcast clips. And then the mom room is everywhere you listen to podcasts. We're also on YouTube. I'm trying to be a YouTuber.
Yeah.
The mom room podcast and TikTok at the Renee Reina.
We will link to all of those places in the show notes so you don't have to write them down as you're driving or doing the 9 million other things you are doing right now while listening to this podcast.
Even if you're a lady surgeon.
Even if
doing
you're a
lady
lady
surgeon
surgeon,
thing.
don't
worry,
worry,
lady
lady
surgeon.
brain surgery right now. You can't write these things down. We're going to link to them with the notes. Don't worry,
Yeah.
lady surgeon. Renee, thanks so much. This was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Renee.